I grew a new lawn from scratch in only 10 days in early spring. Here's how I did it. I started from bare dirt, grass that I killed off last fall, but all of this would work just fine if I had seeded over an existing lawn, or if I had done it 2 weeks or so after applying a fresh round of glyphosate to kill off a previously existing lawn. Now the ground wasn't perfectly flat or level, and the ground wasn't loosened up, so I used my electric Scarifier with the hard tined blade to rip into the upper ½ inch of the ground and redistribute the dirt from the high spots into the low spots, while also loosening up the eventual seed bed with loose dirt that seeds could easily root into. This is kind of like using a mini tiller that only goes a fraction of an inch into the ground. These machines are usually affordable for most people and have many practical applications in the lawn outside of seeding. I'll leave a link to the review of the unit that I use in my lawn down in the description below. But to make sure that the entire seed bed was loose, I went in multiple directions, in multiple passes, taking time to push the loose dirt that I pulled up off the ground around the plot with my leveling rake to ensure that I was able to loosen up enough of the entire seed bed, both on the outskirts and the interior. When the entire seed bed was covered in a large portion of loose dirt, I was then able to use my leveling rake to spread a ½ inch layer of the loose dirt all over the entire space to get a flat surface that had fewer high spots and fewer low spots in it than it started with. While I was doing the seedbed preparation, I was also priming my grass seed inside the house. To get the fastest germination possible, you have to get the seed wet at the right temperature. But in the early spring, soil is rarely warm enough to be considered the correct temperature. And that's why germination this time of year takes so long. You could pre-germinate your grass seed, but I chose to simply prime mine to speed up the germination process, but also to eliminate seed loss. When a seed is germinated prior to it sitting in the soil, the baby roots emerge and then they can dry out, causing sprouts to die. Not all of them will, but many will. By priming the seed, we can easily start the germination process in a controlled environment and then relocate the seed to the soil before it germinates. The end result is faster germination in cool weather and less seed spoilage. Now here in my lawn space, I decided to go with an annual ryegrass. That was my seed of choice because it germinates the fastest of them all, and it's not going to live more than a single season under any scenario. That's important to note because I want to ultimately seed a warm season grass into this area, but it's too early in the year to seed a warm season grass. By establishing an annual rye now, it will be far easier to overseed a different grass type into the rye later in the year. And I won't have to worry about killing off the annual rye either. It's gonna slowly go away all on its own so long as I mow it regularly. Now in the past, I've sprouted annual rye in 3.5 days, but that was in a stable 70-degree environment with no wind whatsoever. Outside, however, I've been experiencing, or at least I was expecting temperatures to fluctuate between low 40s and the mid 60s, with the average daily soil temperature in the mid to upper 50s. During the germination period, this would have resulted in germination taking place around day 8 to 10, based on my prior experience. But by steeping all of that seed, which I had wrapped in cheesecloth in 80-degree tap water for a couple hours prior to sowing, I knew that this was going to jumpstart the enzyme responsible for causing germination in the lawn. After 2 hours in the slightly warmer than room temperature water, I drained the seed and then I mixed it by hand with a bag of alfalfa meal based fertilizer. This product I've used for the past couple seasons, and this year I bought it locally at my Home Depot. It's not that hard to find. Now, any alfalfa meal product is going to work pretty much the same way. There's a rooting compound in alfalfa meal called tricontinol. Tricontinol aids grass establishment in a lawn setting, and the stuff also soaks up a lot of the excess moisture in the seed. Like the alfalfa meal itself is dry. It soaks up that excess moisture. We don't want that seed to be waterlogged, and when it's dried out a little bit, it's it's easier to spread by a standard spreader or just by hand like I did it. Alfalfa meal is also very low in nitrogen by weight, and by mixing a large dose of it with your seed, it's not going to cause any problems to your lawn space. My seed bed right here measures about 300 square feet, and I used an 18-pound bag of alfalfa meal-based fertilizer to mix my seed into. That gives me approximately 0.8 of a pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet for this application. Because alfalfa meal doesn't contain any phosphorus, I would go back over this area with a starter fertilizer after the germination period, but only if I needed to. But because I did a soil test prior to the seeding process, I know that I've got ample phosphorus in my soil already, so the extra application of fertilizer for me is not going to be needed. You can take a look at the link in the description below to learn an additional reason, an additional serious reason why soil tests are worth spending the time to do up front. And spoiler, it doesn't have anything to do with seeding grass. Now, for my area, I decided to hand spread the seed because the space was really long and skinny. I don't want any accidentally thrown into the neighbor's lawn. Now, for larger spaces, I'd probably use a regular spreader, like the one that I mixed this product in by hand. It would work just fine. Alternatively, a drop spreader would probably work just as fine as well, even in this scenario. But I didn't own one, and I didn't think it was worth going out to buy one, so I just did it by hand. With seed and fertilizer spread on the ground, I then hand spread a generous layer of peat moss onto the seed bed. The peat moss could be replaced with coconut coir or clean straw if you really wanted to use a more sustainable product. Now, if you're seeding onto a hill like I did last summer, then I would greatly encourage you to use a straw seeding blanket. That's going to limit soil erosion or seed erosion prior to the germination of the grass seed, and it's also going to keep your seed moist. This is a step that's really easy to want to skip over, but it's one of the most important jobs of them all. Although I steeped my seed and started hydrating the shell with water ahead of time, that seed can and it will easily dry back out in the environment right here with the beating sun, even in the cool temperatures and with the wind. The peat moss or the straw blankets or whatever you use is going to help that seed retain moisture so that the germination process continues unhindered by the changing moisture level of the seed itself. When the seed stays wet and hydrated but not soaking wet, then the only major variable in the germination process that remains largely out of your control is temperature. In cooler weather, the seed will germinate slowly, but by priming the seed first, we limit the slowness because we get the process started in a controlled environment at the perfect temperature. And once my seed was down, I then foot tamped the entire space. I foot tamped the seed into place because I don't own a lawn roller. For very large spaces, a lawn roller might make sense, but for spaces under a couple thousand square feet, I would always foot tamp. I always have. This ensures better seed to soil contact and seed to peat contact. It gives me a more reliable germination rate and better rooting. Next comes watering. I have a full video on how to water grass seed, which I'll link to down in the description below. But to summarize, I'll say this. You have to keep the seed damp at all times, but you don't have to water it for very long at any one time. Hand watering this space, I watered for only about 2 minutes, about 5 to 6 times a day from my hose. Doesn't take anything fancy. And once I get seed germination, I continue to water the entire area for an additional 7 to 10 days, and I pretend that nothing has germinated at all during the entire time. This allows for the later seeds to germinate without dragging the watering process on for way too long. I don't want to get into the diminishing returns territory. Knowing my weather conditions, I had hoped to get first germination around day 4, maybe late day 4, but I wasn't surprised to see it come on day 5. Now by day 6, it looked like a majority of the seed had sprouted, even though the color hadn't come in yet. Now it's common for the first day after sprouting for grass to look pale or a little bit, maybe almost white. The green color doesn't really show up for a day or two after the sprouts get a little bit bigger. And by day 9, my annual rye had greened up and grown tall enough to start mowing with my reel mower. So long as I stayed very careful on it, of course. And by day 10, it's become obvious which spots in that new lawn space are going to be thin versus slow to fill in. I'll continue mowing daily for about a week or so, and will then switch to a once a day watering and every other day mowing somewhere around day 20. Now, the reason why I want to mow more often at first is to encourage more leafing closer to the soil level. I want less leggy growth. In only 10 to 14 more days or so, each of those sprouts are going to no longer be like single blades on the ground. They're going to be 3, maybe 4 blades on average. Each of those blades are going to be closer to the ground, making the soil appear far more densely covered than it does now. In a couple months, I'm going to have a serious ground cover installed, which is going to make overseeding incredibly easy during the hottest months of the year, from late spring through mid-fall. Now, the next step isn't going to apply to people seeding some warm season grasses like Bermuda or Zoysia or any of the fine fescues or bentgrass for any of you weirdo golfers out there. But I'll be applying an application of Mesotrione to this space somewhere around day 20 to limit weed establishment in the area. Because I've got baby grass, weed killers shouldn't be applied for at least a couple months or so. But in the case of annual rye, Mesotrione, which I'm getting in the bottle of Tenacity, which I'm using, can be applied, and I'm definitely going to apply it. My ultimate goal is to have a pure stand of turf grass here, free of weeds. So this is the best way for me to achieve that without having to be reactionary. Now, if this video has been helpful or inspirational to you, then I hope you'll hit that like button. But even more so, I hope you'll watch the follow-up video on supercharging your Tenacity application. If you are going to be applying Mesotrione to your baby grass this year, you might as well supercharge the process and the result. Pretty darned easy to do. You know I'm going to be doing it. I've done it before, and I even made a video about it. The video is linked right up here in the corner. Give it a look and watch that next.